3 men attacked a Mafia boss mid-meal, the Waitress, said stop, and one of them actually did. The air at Bellucci's on Viridian Bay was thick enough to chew. It was a Tuesday night, which meant the kitchen was a pressure cooker of heat. Shouted curses in Italian, and the smell of garlic browning too fast. Out on the floor, the regulars were loud, their laughter bouncing off the dark wood and red velvet. For Harper Ward, all 25 years of her felt it in her arches. This was just another shift, another night of balancing plates and smiling at bad jokes, all to chip away at the mountain of debt from her grandfather's nursing home. The old sailor deserved the best, and she was going to kill herself to give it to him. Her section included the VIP table, the one tucked into the alcove by the bay window. Tonight it was set for 1. This, in itself, was a deviation. The table was reserved for Giuseppe Tarallo, the young, unsettlingly quiet boss of the Italian-Puerto Rican family that held the Viridian docks in a closed fist. And men like Tarallo never, ever ate alone. Yet, there he was. Harper had taken his order a simple veal chop, medium rare, and a glass of water, no ice. She'd noticed immediately that he didn't settle in like a customer. He sat like a man waiting for a fight. His back was angled toward the main dining room, but his eyes never left the reflection in the dark glass of the window, which gave him a perfect, distorted view of the entrance behind him. His fork and knife were laid parallel on the linen, not relaxed, but placed for an easy grip. He wasn't here for the ambiance. Harper was returning from the kitchen, the heavy ceramic plate of veal balanced on her palm, when the night fractured. The front doors burst open, not with the gentle chime of a customer, but with the slam of wood against brick. 3 men, all dressed in identical blue work uniforms for a power company, stormed in. They moved too fast, too low. The din of the restaurant snagged, then died, in the sudden silence. Harper saw the glint of steel. They weren't electricians. They were predators. 1 man pulled a suppressed pistol. The other 2 flashed folding knives, the blades snapping open with a lethal click. They didn't scan the room. They didn't shout. They moved as one unit directly toward the VIP table. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Harper watched, frozen, as Giuseppe Tarallo moved with a speed that defied his calm exterior. He didn't dive for cover. He launched himself sideways, simultaneously hooking a foot under his heavy oak table and flipping it. The table crashed onto its side, a solid shield. As the first attacker raised his suppressed pistol, Giuseppe's hand blurred to his hip, drawing a compact black handgun. The sound of his weapon was a dull, heavy cough swallowed by the velvet curtains. The first attacker crumpled, his shot going wide into the ceiling plaster. The second man vaulted the overturned table, knife leading. Giuseppe met him, turning the brawl into a close-quarters struggle, a brutal dance of limbs and grunts. But it was the third man Harper's eyes locked onto. He was younger, his face pale with a sick mix of adrenaline and terror. He was flanking the fight, his own knife raised, looking for an opening to plunge it into Tarallo's back. He was about to lunge. Something in Harper snapped. It wasn't bravery, it was instinct. It was the same voice she had spent years cultivating, the one she used to pull her grandmother back from the edge of a dementia-fueled panic attack. It was a voice that didn't request. It commanded reality. Stop. The word tore from her throat, sharp and absolute. It cut through the screams of the patrons, who were now scrambling for the exits. It wasn't a plea. It was an order. The third attacker, the one with the knife, froze. His entire body locked up, his arms still raised. He turned his head, his wide, terrified eyes finding hers. It was only for a half second, a single, impossible pause in the middle of a kill. It was all the time needed. From the bar, 2 of Tarallo's men Harper had always assumed were just quiet drinkers descended, a blur of black suits. They slammed the third attacker into the wall, a sickening crunch of drywall and bone, and the knife clattered to the floor. The second attacker was dispatched by Giuseppe himself, a swift, final motion that Harper forced her eyes away from. The restaurant was pure chaos. Women were sobbing, glass was shattered, an overturned wine bottle bled red onto the white tablecloths. The kitchen doors were closed, the chefs vanished, but Giuseppe Turallo wasn't screaming. He wasn't breathing hard. He rose from behind the table, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. He looked at the man who had shot at him, then at the man his bodyguards were now cuffing. He calmly reached into his suit jacket, retrieved a silk pocket square, and began meticulously wiping tomato sauce off his lapel, as if he had merely spilled his dinner. Then he looked at Harper. She was still standing by the service station, the cooling veal chop still balanced on her hand. His eyes, dark and assessing, locked onto hers. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a look of discovery, the way a geologist might look at a plain rock he'd just cracked open to find a flawless diamond. It was a look that said, there is something here that needs to be excavated. His men had the two living attackers secured, dragging them toward a back exit. He straightened his vest. His voice was low, but it carried across the wrecked dining room with absolute authority. She stays. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. Harper's blood ran cold. The heavy plate in her hand suddenly felt light. She understood, with chilling clarity, that in the moment she had spoken, in the half-second a killer had actually listened. She had ceased to be a waitress. She had become his. The cellar at Bellucci's was for high rollers, a quiet room of dark mahogany racks and $1,000 bottles. Tonight, it was an interrogation room. The heavy door was closed, muffling the distant sounds of police sirens and the frantic cleanup upstairs. Harper was sitting on a plush velvet stool, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, metallic tremor in her limbs. Giuseppe Turallo stood by a rack of Barolo, not looking at her, but at the deep red of the wine through the glass. The pocket square he had used to wipe the sauce from his vest was gone. He was immaculate, save for a small, dark speck of blood on his shirt cuff. "Why?" he asked, his voice soft, absorbing the sound in the small room. Did he stop? Harper swallowed? The air was cool down here, smelling of cork and dust. He wasn't committed. The other two were... He was just paid. Giuseppe finally turned, his eyes analytical, not angry. You knew that in a half-second he was hesitating before he even got to the table. Harper said, her voice stronger than she felt. His eyes were too wide. He was holding the knife wrong, braced for a punch, not a kill. Scared people are just waiting for an order. They'll listen to the first voice that sounds like it knows what it's doing. He stared at her. A long, unnerving silence. That wasn't luck, he stated. It wasn't a question. No, she admitted. I used to moonlight at a private care facility. You learn psychological communication for dementia patients, how to de-escalate a panic attack, how to command a room, how to change someone's entire reality just with your tone and your breathing. He was just another man on the verge of a panic attack. Giuseppe absorbed this, filing it away. The only people who knew I was dining alone tonight were my 5 closest people. This was not a random hit. It was an internal leak. The man you stopped, he is the first thread I can pull. Harper stood up, the stool scraping slightly. I'm glad I could help, but my shift is over. I need to go. I'm sure you do, he said, his voice flat. The nursing home payments for your grandfather are steep. She froze. You think you're going home alone tonight? He almost sounded amused, but the amusement didn't reach his eyes. That is stupid. They saw your face. They saw you stop their man. They heard me tell you to stay. Right now. You are the one thing that went wrong in their plan. They will want to correct that. So what? You're going to hold me here. I am going to offer you protection, he corrected, as if explaining a business merger. An armored car will take you home. You will be given a new phone. Your shift hours at Bellucci's will be changed, and my people will drive you to and from them. A hot spike of anger shot through Harper, clearer and stronger than the fear. You don't get to do that. You don't get to just take over my life because your business associates tried to kill you. To understand an asset, Giuseppe said, ignoring her protest. I run a background check. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Harper Ward, 25, parents deceased. You live in the old walk-ups on 7th. You are the sole guardian for your 15-year-old brother, Noah Ortiz. He plays guitar. He's trying for the scholarship at the Viridian School of Contemporary Arts, a lot riding on that. Every word was a nail, pinning her in place. He had found her weakest point in less than 20 minutes. He stopped directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the faint scent of iron and expensive cologne. You want to handle this yourself, he concluded, his voice a low vibration. But the people who sent those men, they will not ask your permission. They will just show up at your apartment or at your brother's school. So I am asking first. Harper looked into his dark, unblinking eyes. He wasn't threatening her. He was just stating the new rules of her reality. She hated him for it. She hated that he was right. Just the car, she said, her voice tight. Just a ride home. I'm not your property. Of course, Giuseppe said. He knew, and she knew, that it wasn't because she trusted him. It was because, for the first time, she was truly afraid to walk out of the restaurant's front door. She knew they would still be out there, watching. The armored town car dropped her 2 blocks away, a compromise she'd fought for in the silent, tense ride from the restaurant. The walk up the 3 flights to her apartment felt different. The familiar cracks in the plaster and the smell of their neighbors cooking, usually comforting, now seemed thin, like a veil over something dangerous. She opened her door, and the sound that washed over her was the one thing that made sense in her life. Noah was practicing. The apartment on the 3rd floor smelled like old wood, frying onions, and the complex, hopeful notes of Noah's acoustic guitar. He was hunched over the instrument on their worn-out sofa, his brow furrowed in concentration, fingers flying over a fast, intricate passage. He was 15, and his world was currently confined to the 6 strings under his fingers and the audition for the Viridian School of Contemporary Arts. She intended to keep it that way. He looked up when the door clicked shut, his playing slowing to a halt. Hey, thought you were on a double. Harper dropped her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, forcing a casualness into her voice that felt like swallowing glass. Hey. Restaurant's just upgrading security. Some issue with the freezers. I guess they're putting guards on the block for a few days, so you might see a car or 2. Don't worry about it. Noah shrugged, already turning his attention back to the fretboard. Weird. As long as you get paid. He didn't understand. He wasn't supposed to. That was her job. But later that night, long after Noah was asleep, Harper stood in the dark of her living room. She looked past the gap in the curtains, down to the rain-slicked street, parked 1 building over. Under the flickering orange streetlight was a black SUV. The interior lights were off. Its windows were so tinted they looked solid. They weren't hiding, just waiting. A silent, heavy presence that had anchored itself to her life. She felt the walls of her tiny apartment closing in. She needed to work. She needed the routine, the distraction, the cash. She pulled out her phone and texted her manager, Maria, need extra shifts. Can I pick up tomorrow's lunch? The reply came back almost instantly, which was unusual for Maria after midnight. Sorry, Harper. Big VIP request. He wants you to take the next 2 days off. Paid. Of course. Rest up. Harper stared at the screen, a cold dread seeping into her stomach. Paid. He had touched her job. He had touched her money. He was isolating her, cutting her off from the one place she was known, all under the guise of paying her for her trouble. Morning came with a hard, polite knock that was nothing like the usual delivery drivers or neighbors. Harper, who hadn't slept, opened it to find a man in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. He was older than Giuseppe, with silvering hair at his temples and a calm, professional demeanor. Miss Ward, my name is Lucio Ferri, he said, his voice smooth and respectful. Mister, Tarallo requests your assistance at a secure location. We need you to confirm the identity of the 3rd attacker. It wasn't a request. It was a summons, delivered with the courtesy of a luxury hotel concierge. The secure location was not a high-rise or a bank vault. It was a vast, cold boathouse in the industrial part of the harbor, smelling of salt, rust, and diesel. The black SUV pulled inside, the metal door rolling shut behind them with a heavy, final sound. Giuseppe Turallo was standing near the water slip, looking out at the murky bay, and in the center of the concrete floor, tied to a simple metal chair, was the man from the restaurant, Eli Tran. He wasn't beaten. There were no bruises, no blood. He was just pale, his cheap work uniform rumpled, his eyes wide and terrified. The moment he saw Harper, his expression didn't shift to anger, but to a strange, anxious recognition. Her intuition had been right. He was a foot soldier, not a killer, and he was in way over his head. Giuseppe turned from the window. He walked past Eli as if the man were just a piece of furniture. "Is this him?" "You know it is," Harper said, her arms crossed. "I want you to talk to him," Giuseppe said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "You got him to stop. He listens to you. I want to know who hired him. You want to use me as a lockpick. I want to use the right tool for the job." Harper looked from the coiled, powerful stillness of Giuseppe to the trembling, pathetic figure of Eli Tran. She was the only person in this room who didn't operate on violence. That was her value. That was her leverage. "All right," Harper said, stepping forward, "but on two conditions." Giuseppe's expression didn't change, but Lucio, standing by the door, raised an eyebrow. "One," she said, planting her feet, "you never go near my brother. You don't look him up. You don't send people to his school. You don't even learn the name of his favorite song. He stays out, completely. Go on." Giuseppe said, "Two, you don't touch my job. You don't tell me when I can or can't work. My shifts at Bellucci's are mine. My pay is mine. You stay out of that, too." She expected him to argue, to push back, to remind her of his power. Instead, a slow, humorless smile touched the corner of Giuseppe Turallo's mouth. It was the smile of a man who had just watched his opponent move her pawn directly into his queen's path. "You are negotiating with the wrong person. Harper," he said, his voice soft. "I was already planning to pay you double." They put Eli Tran in a small, cold office off the main boathouse floor. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting a sterile white glare that made his skin look pale and sickly. Giuseppe and Lucio had left, a silent acknowledgement that this was not their area of expertise. This was hers. Harper sat across the metal table from him. She didn't use the sharp, accusatory tone of an interrogator. She used the low, calm cadence of a caregiver, the one she used when her grandfather woke up convinced it was 1958 and he was late for his watch on the docks. "They didn't beat you," she observed quietly. Eli shook his head, his hands cuffed to the chair. "He just watches me. Mr. Turallo. He just looks—" "Who hired you?" "Eli," she asked, her voice soft, offering a lifeline, not a threat. They weren't professionals, not like him. That, finally, broke him. The words came out in a rush. "I just drive. They said $5,000, just drive the car. It was the Rook Street Union. Never heard of them." Harper said, "Nobody has—" "They're new. They want the North Docks, Mr. Turallo's docks. They said they had a man on the inside, someone high up, someone who gave them the schedule." He looked at her, his eyes desperate. "They knew he'd be alone. They knew the exact minute your boss would set the veal chop down. That's why we went in then. Someone in his family fed him to us." When Harper relayed the information to Giuseppe, his face betrayed nothing, but the air around him grew colder. They were standing by the water slip, the murky harbor water lapping just feet away. "Rook Street Union," Lucio said with contempt. "A bunch of street kids with delusions." "Street kids who knew my exact location," Giuseppe corrected, his voice dangerously smooth. "Only 5 people knew that I was dining alone tonight. 5 people in my entire organization." He didn't list the names, but Harper could see the calculations clicking behind his eyes. He was sifting through his most trusted circle, and the list included Marcel Leone, his father's old financial advisor, a man who had been at Turallo dinners for 30 years. The threat wasn't just external anymore. It was sitting at his own table. This changed Harper's status. She was no longer just a witness. She was the person who had unlocked the first clue to the betrayal. He couldn't let her go, but he also knew, after her defiance in the cellar, that she wouldn't be locked away. So, the next morning, he didn't put her in storage. He put her on display. She was driven to the D'Aquila Council Hall, a skyscraper of smoked glass and polished granite that fronted as D'Aquila Global Logistics. This was no dim, velvet-lined backroom. This was the heart of the Turalo enterprise. Harper was given a security pass and escorted to a glass-walled office that overlooked a vast operations floor. It was a shock. She saw dozens of analysts at workstations, their faces illuminated by massive, wall-mounted screens. The screens weren't showing surveillance photos. They were showing shipping manifests, commodity prices, container routes from Singapore, and rail line schedules. She wasn't watching a gangster. She was watching the chief executive officer of a shadow corporation. This was the true source of his power, not just guns, but information, logistics, and the entire flow of commerce in and out of Viridian Harbor. He kept her there, bringing her coffee, having her sit in silence during his meetings. She watched him command logistics managers and union bosses with the same quiet, lethal authority he used on his bodyguards. On the second evening, she walked into his penthouse office. "This isn't protection," she stated, closing the heavy oak door behind her. "This is a gilded cage. You're keeping me here as an asset." Giuseppe looked up from a stack of port ledgers. "I'm keeping you here because you are the one person the traitor doesn't know I have. That doesn't work for me." Harper walked closer, her heels silent on the plush carpet. "So let's set a boundary. You think you can threaten me, or use my brother, or lock me up when you feel like it, but if you push me, if you try to treat me like one of your soldiers, I will walk out of this building. I will go directly to the Atlantic Urban Security Oversight Bureau. I know they watch this building. I'll tell ASAB everything I saw. Eli Tran, the boathouse, the Rook Street Union, everything." He went perfectly still. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features. It wasn't just that she knew the name of the obscure and powerful agency monitoring the port. It was that she had the spine to use it as a threat against him. She was drawing a line in his own office. The tension held, thick and sharp, until later that night. A storm had rolled in, lashing rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bay. The city lights blurred into watercolor streaks. Harper was standing by the glass, rubbing her forearm. "What is it?" Giuseppe asked from his desk. "Nothing. A scratch from the restaurant. When the table went over, it stings." He said nothing, but rose and went to a sleek, built-in cabinet. He returned not with a bodyguard, but with a small, professional first aid kit. He motioned to her arm. Hesitantly, she held it out. He took her forearm, his grip firm but gentle. He cleaned the angry red line with an antiseptic wipe. His touch was clinical, precise, but the proximity was electric. The room was silent except for the drum of the rain. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the clean, sharp scent of his cologne. His head was bent, his focus entirely on the small wound. When he finished, he didn't let go. His thumb rested on the soft skin of her inner arm, his fingers lightly curled around her. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. The air crackled. The space between them shrank from professional to personal. She could see the dark gold flecks in his eyes, feel his breath warm against her skin. "That night at Bellucci's," he said, his voice a low vibration, barely louder than the storm. "When you shouted, when you made that man freeze, I thought, I need someone like that by my side. It wasn't just an observation, it was a confession, and it was an invitation." Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw his gaze drop to her mouth, and a sudden sharp jolt of desire shot through her. She wanted, with a frightening intensity, to know what it felt like, to close that last inch of space. He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to retreat. Instead, she moved her free hand, placing it flat against the solid wall of his chest. She didn't shove him, but the pressure was firm, stopping his advance instantly. "I don't sleep with the man who controls my work schedule," she whispered, her voice shaking only slightly. Giuseppe stared at her, his eyes searching hers, reading the conflict, the desire, and the defiance. A long, charged second passed. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. He stepped back, releasing her arm. He smiled. It wasn't his cold, corporate smile. It was a flash of genuine, reluctant amusement. "You have a spine of steel, Harper Ward," he said. His gaze was no longer just assessing. It was hooked, fascinated. He liked that she had said no. He liked her backbone even more than he desired her. The delicate balance Harper had tried to maintain shattered on a Wednesday afternoon. She was in Giuseppe's glass office, supposedly reviewing shipping manifests she didn't understand, when her new, untappable phone buzzed. It was a text from Noah, a simple picture of a man in a baseball cap across the street from his school, followed by "Weird guy just took my picture. Asked me when my audition was." Harper's blood turned to ice water. Before she could even process the violation, Giuseppe was at her side, his eyes fixed on the screen. She hadn't realized she'd stood up so fast. He took the phone from her hand, his face, usually so controlled, hardened into a mask of cold fury. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait. He made one call, his voice a low, lethal command. "Pull the file for Noah Ortiz from the Viridian School of Arts. Now, transfer it to the Harborlight Arts Collective. Full scholarship, effective today. And find the man in the picture." He hung up and looked at her. "It's done. He's out of their reach. What is the Harborlight Arts Collective?" Harper asked, her voice trembling with a new, different kind of fear. "It is a private arts foundation I own," he said, as if stating the weather. "It nurtures young talent from the city. It's a shell." She breathed, the realization dawning. "It's one of your fronts. You just moved him. You just put your hands on his entire future. That was his dream school. His dream was to be safe. I just made him safe," Giuseppe replied, his voice final. This was the moment she realized. This was not protection. This was absorption. If she let him, Giuseppe Tarallo would pave over every part of her life with his own concrete, smoothing out the dangers but erasing her in the process. He wouldn't just guard her. He would own her. The thought was suffocating. She saw her future a beautiful cage, a brother whose life was bought and paid for by a man she both desired and despised. That night, she used the laptop he had provided her, the one he thought was secure, and routed her signal through 3 different public hotspots. She found a name from an old newspaper article, a name she remembered from a few months back when Bellucci's had its smuggling investigation. Agent Leora Sykes, Atlantic Urban Security Oversight Bureau. Harper sent an anonymous encrypted email. "I have information on the Rook Street Union. I also have information on the recent attack at Bellucci's. I want to trade." The reply came in under 5 minutes. "Secure line, 15 minutes. The call was cold, professional, and terrifying. Harper hiding in a stairwell. Her voice a whisper. Laid it out. "I can give you the name of the attacker who survived, Eli Tran. I can give you the group that hired him. In exchange, I need a buffer. I need you to know that my brother and I are assets, not targets. I need a safety line if he decides to pull me under." Agent Sykes' voice was sharp. "We've been monitoring the Rooks, but they're ghosts. This is valuable. Miss Ward, but you need to understand something. We are very interested in the Rook Street Union, but Giuseppe Tarallo is our long-term target. If you pull him into this file, if you become our source inside his organization, you will eventually have to choose. You cannot save yourself and him. I'm not trying to save him." Harper lied, her heart pounding. "I'm trying to save me." She hung up, her hands shaking. She had just opened a second front in a war she never asked to join. Meanwhile, Giuseppe was pulling his own threads. He had Lucio run a deep financial audit on his 5 closest advisors. The report came back late the next night. "It's clean," Lucio reported, "except for one thing. Marcel Leone. 2 new offshore accounts were opened from his firm's main server 3 days before the attack. Untraceable, but the timing is sloppy." Giuseppe stared at the name, his face grim. Marcel, the man who had taught him how to read a ledger. He needed to test Harper. He needed to see how she held up under the pressure of his world, not just in its aftermath. The next day, he brought her to a negotiation. It wasn't with gunmen, but with an old, stubborn dock owner who was refusing to give Tarallo's ships priority. "You won't speak," Giuseppe instructed her in the car. "You will just sit. Watch. Listen." The meeting was tense. The old man was loud, angry, and dismissive. Giuseppe remained perfectly calm, his voice never rising, yet he systematically dismantled the man's every argument, his logic as sharp and cold as a scalpel. Harper watched, fascinated. She saw him use the old man's own anger against him, redirecting it, letting him exhaust himself. And she realized, with a chill, that he was using the same techniques on the dock owner that she had used on Eli Tran. He was de-escalating to win. In the car on the way back, the armored silence of the vehicle felt charged. He had won the negotiation without a single threat. He was afraid. Harper observed he was reasonable. Giuseppe corrected. He turned in his seat, the city light sliding over the sharp planes of his face. The professional distance was gone. His voice was lower, more personal. "I want you close, Harper, and it's not just because you're intelligent." It was the first time he had been so direct. The air thickened, the unspoken desire from his office rushing back in. Harper felt her pulse quicken. But the image of Noah's scholarship, the cold voice of Agent Sykes, the feeling of his fingerprints all over her life, it all slammed down like a brake. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You haven't asked me if I want that." The intimate spell shattered, his eyes hardened, the brief vulnerability vanishing. The air in the car turned cold, filled with the sudden, sharp tension of two opposing forces. He looked away from her, back out the window at the harbor lights. "No," he said, his voice flat and corporate once more. "I suppose I haven't." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they parted in the lobby of the D'Aquila building, it was with a new, icy distance. They were no longer just a boss and his asset. They were two people, each preparing their next move, each holding a different set of secrets. The icy stalemate between them held for 2 days. Then, the Rook Street Union cut the silence. It happened just before 5 in the morning, in the cold, gray light before dawn. It was not a firefight. It was a single, contemptuous statement. A sharp crack echoed from the street, followed by the crystalline explosion of Harper's living room window. She'd been on the sofa, unable to sleep, and instinct threw her to the worn carpet, her hands flying to cover her head. "Harper!" "What was that?" Noah yelled from his room, his voice cracking with sleep and fear. She stayed down, her heart hammering against the floorboards. The bullet had punched a neat, quarter-sized hole through the glass and embedded itself in the drywall, precisely 6 inches above where her head had been. No one was hurt. The message was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. "We know where you sleep. We can touch you." Before the sun was fully above the harbor, Lucio Ferri was at her door. He didn't knock. He used a key she had never given him, and the sound of the lock turning sent a fresh wave of ice through her. "Pack a bag for yourself and your brother," Lucio said, his face grim, his eyes already scanning the room and landing on the shattered window. "You have 5 minutes." There was no more discussion. There was no more illusion of choice. Giuseppe Tarallo was done offering protection. He was now enforcing it. They were moved to the Aria Vault. It was a name that meant nothing to the public. A sleek tower of black glass and steel that didn't appear in any tourist guide. It was a fortress disguised as a luxury hotel, a place where the elevators required a fingerprint, and every floor had its own private security. Their suite was vast, beautiful, and sterile. The windows overlooked the entire bay, but they did not open. Noah, caught between the thrill of the opulent suite and the raw terror of the gunshot, retreated into the safety of his headphones, practicing his guitar in his own soundproofed room. Harper just paced, a panther in a cage so large she couldn't see the bars. A quiet knock came near midnight. She opened the door to find Giuseppe. He was alone. There was no Lucio, no security visible in the hall. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up his forearms. He held a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He looked less like a mob boss and more like a man at the end of a very long day. He looked tired. "You're afraid," he stated, his voice low. "I came to see if you were..." She stepped back, letting him in. They left the main lights off, the suite illuminated only by the vast, glittering spread of Viridian Harbor below. He poured the wine. Handing her a glass, they sat on the modern, uncomfortable sofa, the silence stretching. "My grandfather," Harper said suddenly, her voice rough. "The one in the home. He has dementia. Sometimes he thinks I'm my grandmother. Come to take him sailing. He was a sailor his whole life. That's why I fight for the money. It's the only place that knows how to talk to him, how to bring him back. Even for a minute." Giuseppe didn't offer pity. He just nodded, absorbing the fact. He stared into his own dark red wine. "I was supposed to be gone by 30, he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in. "My brother, Angelo. He was the heir. He loved the title, the noise. I was the logistician, the quiet one. I was going to take the legal side of the business and never look back." He took a slow drink, but Angelo was careless. He made enemies he didn't respect. They killed him on his 30th birthday. I had to take over. I wasn't given a choice, either. The confession hung in the air, a fragile bridge built between two prisoners. He was no longer just the man who had seized her life. He was a man trapped in his own. He set his glass down on the table and turned to her. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the air drawing tight, slowly as if testing the ice. He moved his hand, not to grab her, but to rest it lightly on the cushion beside her. Then, his fingers brushed the back of her hand, a simple, warm, heavy touch. It was a question. Harper's breath caught in her throat. She looked at his hand, then at his face. He was watching her, his dark eyes searching for any sign of fear or rejection. She didn't pull away. He took her stillness as his answer. His other hand came up, and his fingers brushed her jaw, tilting her chin up. He leaned in, and his mouth met hers. It was not a kiss of violence or bruising possession. It was deep and slow and searingly gentle. It was the kiss of a man who was holding himself in check, a man who was, impossibly, listening. He was waiting to be told to stop. For a moment she was frozen. Then a tremor ran through her, a surrender to the exhaustion and the fear and the strange, magnetic pull he had on her. Her hand came up, resting flat against his chest. She could feel the solid muscle, the powerful, steady beat of his heart. She leaned into him, her body molding against his, a silent admission. The scent of him, clean soap and expensive wine, was overwhelming. His arm circled her back, his hand splaying wide and low, pulling her flush against him. The gentleness faded, replaced by a raw, possessive need. He deepened the kiss, and she answered, her fingers curling into his shirt. She could feel his heartbeat quicken, hammering against her palm. His hand slid from her back, tracing the curve of her spine down to the dip of her waist, and settled firmly on her hip. His grip was possessive, anchoring her to him. He broke the kiss, his breath hot against her skin as he murmured something in Italian, a low, guttural word she didn't understand but felt in her bones. He moved, kissing a path along her jaw, to the sensitive skin just beneath her ear. Harper's head fell back, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was the precipice. His hand on her hip was a brand, and she knew he was seconds from taking more. He paused, his lips hovering over the pulse in her throat. A final, silent question. "Okay," she whispered. It was barely a sound, just a puff of air, but it was a clear, unambiguous consent. It was all he needed. He shifted, laying her back against the arm of the sofa, his body a heavy, warm weight partially covering hers. Their clothes were still on, a last frustrating barrier, but his mouth was on hers again, hungry, demanding. His hand moved, finding the hem of her shirt, his fingers brushing the warm skin of her back, sending an electric shock through her system. He kissed her throat, the hollow of her collarbone, each touch a spark in the gathering fire. "You're mine," he whispered against her skin, and it was not a question. He pulled back, just enough to look at her in the dim light. His eyes were dark, his breathing ragged. He stood, pulling her effortlessly to her feet. He didn't release her hand, but led her from the living room, past the sleeping city and into the darkness of the bedroom. He stopped only to pull the heavy blackout curtains closed, sealing them in. The room was cast in the single, warm glow of a bedside lamp. He turned to her, his face taut with a control she knew was costing him. "Tonight," he said, his voice thick. "Tonight is just yours." When Harper woke, the light in the room was gray and new. She was alone, but the indentation on the pillow beside her was still fresh, the air still holding the faint scent of him. A strange, deep quiet settled in her, a feeling of being anchored, even as panic simmered at the edges. She pulled the hotel's thick robe around her and walked into the living room. Noah was already awake, sitting at the grand dining table. He was staring at a thick, official-looking file. "Harp," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You're not going to believe this." On the polished table was a packet bound in the deep blue colors of the Harbor Light Arts Collective. On top was a single sheet of paper. It was an acceptance letter. Noah Ortiz, full tuition scholarship, effective immediately. Giuseppe had done it. Sometime in the small hours of the night, between their passionate embrace and the dawn, he had finalized his brother's future. The gesture was overwhelming, a wave of profound gratitude that made her knees weak. And right behind it, a cold, sharp tide of fear. It had been so effortless for him. The security of the Aria vault was absolute, but the information Giuseppe brought into their suite felt like a new kind of violation. Eli Tran, under the relentless, quiet pressure of Lucio Ferri, had finally broken completely. He gave up his contact, Giuseppe said. He was standing by the vast window, the morning light catching the anger in his eyes. He didn't need to yell. His voice was flat, which was far more terrifying. The man who fed him my schedule. The man who orchestrated the hit, Harper, nursing a cup of coffee, went still. Who Marcel Leone, the name hung in the air. Marcel, the old world advisor, the man who had been like a second father to Giuseppe. "It gets worse," Giuseppe continued, his gaze fixed on the harbor below. "Eli's orders weren't just to kill me. The Rook Street Union wanted leverage. Marcel told them that if the hit failed, they were to take you." Harper's coffee cup clicked as she set it down, her hand suddenly unsteady. "Me, why me? Because," Giuseppe said, turning to face her, his expression unreadable. "Marcel had already observed my interest in you. He told them you would be my pressure point." A cold, sickening wave washed over Harper. The night before the wine, the confessions, the raw intimacy flashed in her mind. It hadn't been a private, hidden moment. It had been observed. It had been catalogued by a trader and priced as a commodity. Her feelings, her body, her very presence had been calculated as a weakness to be sold. The realization was clarifying. It burned away the last of her fear, replacing it with a hard, cold anger that mirrored his. "So you'll kill him," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Lucio is already preparing," Giuseppe said. "It will be a quiet retirement, a heart attack, a boating accident. No." Giuseppe stopped, his head tilted. "No, you can't," Harper said, standing to face him, her mind working with a desperate, sudden clarity. "Think. You kill Marcel, who becomes the only living person who knows the full link between your organization and the Rook Street Union me. Eli is your prisoner. Marcel is dead. I'm the loose end. I become the target for every man on both sides who wants this information buried." She saw the logic land. He hadn't considered that angle. He was still thinking like a boss, not like a target. "You're right," he said. Well, his voice clipped. "So we don't kill him," she continued, pacing. "Not yet. We use him, and we use Eli. Right now, the Rooks think their inside man is safe and their attacker is either dead or missing. We let them think Eli is still in play. We make them think he's a loose cannon they need to control. A baited trap," Giuseppe mused, catching on. "We use Eli to set a meeting with the Rooks. We choose the time. We choose the place. And you get to clean house. All at once." Harper finished. He looked at her for a long time, the cold fury in his eyes replaced by something else, a sharp, calculating respect. He was seeing her not as a woman he'd taken to his bed, but as a strategist, an equal. He's reluctant, Giuseppe said slowly, weighing the risk. But he's terrified. He'll do what you tell him. He will. Harper agreed, because I'm the only person who's ever gotten him to stop. He nodded once. He was giving her control, not as a gift, but as a tactical decision. It was the only way to keep her. He was realizing, not by caging her, but by convincing her to stay in the war room. The next few days were a blur of tense planning, a strange new domesticity forming in the eye of the storm. They moved between the cold, tactical world of the D'Aquila offices and the warm, quiet bubble of the Aria vault. In this new proximity, they saw new sides of each other. Harper was walking past the vault's private, soundproofed firing range when she saw Giuseppe and Lucio with 2 new bodyguards. She heard the sharp, controlled cracks of gunfire. But as she watched, she realized Giuseppe was correcting the younger man's stance. "No," he said, his voice low but clear. "Not the chest, the knee, the shoulder. You don't need a kill shot to win a fight. You just need to stop the threat. Incapacitation first, termination last. Dead men can't give you information. Later." He found her in the suite's small study. She was hunched over a desk, a box of brightly colored markers open. She was writing notes for Noah, tips for his orientation at the new arts collective. Remember to check your E string. Don't rush the tempo. Be nice to the bass players. They were mundane, loving instructions, a splash of vibrant, normal color in their gray, lethal world. He watched her for a full minute, her brow furrowed in concentration, and he said nothing, just took in the sight. But Harper was moving her own pieces. That afternoon, while Giuseppe was in a deep meeting, she made the call. "Agent Sykes," she said, her voice low, using the secure line. "Miss Ward, I was wondering if you'd call." "I'm not trading. I'm updating your file," Harper said. "All business." "There is an internal conflict in the Tarallo organization. A traitor has been identified. Marcel Leone. There is going to be a purge, and it's going to involve the Rook Street Union. I'm telling you this so that when it happens, your agency knows the context. I'm not asking for an intervention. I'm just giving you the data. Data is always welcome," Leora said, her voice sharp with interest. "Be careful, Miss Ward. If ASAB is forced to move on this, and Tarallo feels a betrayal, he won't care about context. He'll only care about the source." "I know," Harper said, and hung up. She had just laid her one-card-thin insurance policy, a move that could just as easily save her as it could get her killed. The plan was set. The bait meeting, with Eli Tran as the lure, would take place in 3 days. They chose the location, a disused warehouse on Pier 4, and they chose the time 9 at night. It was the peak of the annual Viridian Harbor Festival. The entire waterfront would be flooded with people. Music and noise, the perfect cover for a quiet, brutal execution. The night before the operation, Harper slipped out of the Aria vault. She had told Lucio she needed air, a walk, something to clear her head. The lie felt brittle, but he had allowed it, though she knew a car was following her from a discreet distance. Agent Leora Sykes was waiting in the deep shadow of a closed bookstore. She wasn't in uniform, appearing just like another city resident in a dark jacket, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "I'm glad you reached out, Miss Ward," Leora said, her voice low and fast. "Your intelligence on Leone is solid. But my superiors at ASAB are not interested in a simple street bust. They want the Rook Street Union, and they want a significant, actionable piece of the Tarallo network. If you only give us the Rooks and let Tarallo walk away clean, this internal meeting will be flagged. They won't approve the operation." Harper felt the trap closing. She was caught between 2 massive, grinding forces. This was the moment she had to gamble. "You won't get him," Harper said, her voice surprisingly steady in the cold air. "If you try for a full takedown, he'll vanish. The Rooks will scatter, and you'll get nothing but shell casings. So here is the deal I'm offering." Leora's eyebrow twitched, but she remained silent. "I will be at the meeting tomorrow. I will be wearing a wire and a camera. I will get you Marcel Leone confessing to the attempted hit, and I will record the entire transaction with the Rook Street Union leadership. You will have their structure, their faces, and their conspiracy on a silver platter. That's not enough, Leora said. I'm not finished. Harper cut back. In exchange, your strike team stays clear of Pier 4 until my signal, and Giuseppe Turallo's primary transport lines, the ones D'Aquila Logistics runs. Stay off your immediate target list. They are to be considered untouchable for this operation. Leora almost laughed. You're asking me to give a Mafia boss immunity. I'm asking you to be strategic, Harper said, her words sharp as ice. You get the rooks. You get the traitor inside the Turallo family. And in return for this, consideration. Giuseppe Turallo's organization will reduce violent activity at the port by 30%. I will hold him to it. Leora stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The audacity of it, a waitress, dictating terms to a federal agency and brokering a peace treaty with the mob. And you think you can make him agree to that? You let me worry about him, Harper said. Do we have a deal or not when she returned to the penthouse? The silence in the room was heavy and cold. Giuseppe was standing by the window, his back to her, looking down at the city lights. On the coffee table, a tablet was illuminated. On its screen was a grainy, high-angle surveillance photo from a street camera, time-stamped just 10 minutes ago. It showed Harper standing close to Leora, their faces hidden in shadow, but their intent clear. You went for air, he said, his voice flat. Giuseppe, you went to ASAB. He turned, and his face was not the calm, controlled mask she knew. It was ravaged by a cold, quiet fury. The one organization you threatened me with, the one card you had, you went to them. Behind my back, you had me followed, she shot back, feeling the sting of his distrust. I have everyone followed, he finally yelled, his voice echoing in the vast, silent room. The explosion of sound made her flinch. I brought you into this world, into my home, to keep you safe. Not to have you consort with my enemies, not for you to become a knife to press against my own throat. The injustice of his words, the sheer, blind possession, broke her fear. Safe, she cried, her voice rising to match his. You call this safe, locked in a glass tower, watching you move my brother's life around like a pawn on a chessboard, having my apartment shot up. That's not safety. Giuseppe, that's just a prettier cage. She stalked toward him, her hands balled into fists, the long, simmering resentment boiling over. Safety isn't when only you get to choose what happens. That's just control. Her words hit him harder than a physical blow. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by the raw, bitter truth of her accusation. He saw her, not as his asset, not as his lover, but as a person he had tried to break and had failed. He should have locked her in the room. He should have taken this operation out of her hands, but he knew, with a certainty that infuriated him, that he still needed her. Marcel is desperate, he said at last, the anger receding, replaced by the cold strategist. He will be bringing an Overwatch team. Snipers, I'm certain of it. He won't walk into this without one. He looked at her, his gaze heavy with the weight of their fight. I need your instincts. I need you to read the room. I need you to feel them before they move. He let out a slow, ragged breath. In spite of this, I still trust your gift more than I trust my own men's eyes. The Harbor Festival was a sensory assault. The pier throbbed with the bass of a live band, the air thick with the smell of funnel cake and the salt of the bay. Thousands of people milled about, a sea of colored lights and noise. It was the perfect acoustic and visual cover. Harper was wired, a small, high-fidelity microphone tucked into her collar, a button camera on her dress. Giuseppe was in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, looking like any other young executive enjoying the night out. To blend in. He reached for her hand. The contact was a jolt, a sudden, piercing intimacy in the center of the crowd. It wasn't the controlling grip he'd used before, or the passionate claim from their night together. It was a simple, firm clasp. His hand was warm and dry, a solid anchor in the chaos. She found her fingers lacing with his, an instinct she didn't fight. They walked through the throng, moving toward the dark, isolated warehouses of Pier 4, and for 5 fragile, impossible minutes, The lie became the truth. They weren't a boss and his informant. They were just a man and a woman, their hands locked, shoulders brushing, moving as one. The noise of the festival faded, the colored lights blurred, and all that existed was the shared electric current between them, a desperate, unspoken longing for a normal life, a normal night that was forever out of their reach. They stopped in the shadows just outside the designated warehouse. The music was a dull thud behind them. "The wire is live," she whispered. "I'm transmitting data," she said, her voice clear. In a dark ASAP van blocks away, Leora Sykes watched the feed crackle to life. A moment later, Harper's hidden phone vibrated. A single text from Leora received. "We are watching." She looked up at Giuseppe. He was scanning the rooftops, his hand still holding hers, but his grip was now purely tactical. He knew she was sending the signal, but he didn't know to whom or what price she had just paid for his safety. He was trusting her, and she could feel how much it was costing him. He met her gaze, his eyes a dark, complex mix of raw pride and agonizing suspicion. "Well," Giuseppe murmured, his voice barely audible over the distant music, "now we're both sitting on a powder keg. Amore." Leora Sykes' betrayal was swift and absolute. She had used Harper's live data feed not just to capture the rooks at the pier, but to simultaneously authorize strikes on 3 of Turallo's adjacent warehouses, completely violating the firewall Harper had negotiated. The operation was a chaotic, bloody failure. The Rook Street Union scattered, panicked, and Marcel Leone, now exposed to both Giuseppe and the law, vanished. He resurfaced 2 weeks later, a cornered animal making his final move. Giuseppe, in a rare and calculated public appearance, was attending the Viridian Harbor Restoration Fund Gala. The venue was the old Viridian Terminal, a vast Gothic train station turned event space. It was a show of strength, a message that he was unharmed and in control. Marcel, pulling together the last desperate members of the Rook Street Union, saw it as his last chance to seize the one asset that still had value. The attack was not subtle. A small, concussive charge detonated near the main entrance, a diversion designed to sow panic. The blast wave tore through the lobby, and the sound of shattering glass and screams filled the air. Harper, who had been at Giuseppe's side, was torn from his grasp by the surging, terrified crowd. She heard him shout her name, a raw sound that was cut short by a grunt of pain. She was pushed, carried by the human tide, away from the main hall and through a set of double doors leading into the station's dark, unrestored maintenance bays. She stumbled into a cavernous warehouse, a graveyard of skeletal, rusting train cars. The air smelled of cold iron and dust, and she was not alone. Huddled behind a stack of rotting wooden pallets, she saw Eli Tran. Lucio had apparently kept him on ice, a loose thread from the original attack. The heavy bay doors slammed shut, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the emergency lights. "Don't hurt her," Marcel Leone's voice echoed from the shadows. He stepped forward, flanked by 4 gunmen, the last dregs of the Rooks. His elegant suit was rumpled, his face slick with sweat. She's the prize. He'll trade half his empire for her. He looked at Harper, a frantic, triumphant gleam in his eyes. He wasn't here to kill her. He was here to package her. In that cold, dark moment, Harper truly understood. To Marcel, to Asabi, perhaps even to Giuseppe. She was not a person. She was a bargaining chip. A side door groaned, and Giuseppe entered. He was alone, save for Lucio, who was right behind him. Giuseppe's left arm was pressed tight to his side, his white shirt sleeves soaked dark with blood from a piece of shrapnel. He must have seen the ASABB perimeter forming outside, a perimeter that had clearly been waiting for this. He couldn't fight a war on 2 fronts. He was here for her. Marcel Giuseppe's voice was low, commanding. Even through the pain, "It's over." One of the Rook gunmen, a kid no older than Noah, panicked. He scrambled toward the nearest target, grabbing Eli Tran and shoving a pistol against his temple. "You stay back!" Turallo the kid shrieked, his hand shaking violently. "I'll kill him, I swear to God." Eli squeezed his eyes shut, trembling. A choked sob caught in his throat. Stop Harper's voice. It wasn't a scream or a plea. It was a thunderclap of pure, absolute command. It cut through the metallic echo, the panicked breathing, the entire standoff. And for one impossible, heart-stopping second, every single person in the room froze. The young gunman's trigger finger went slack. Marcel's men flinched. Even Lucio paused. The legend had grown. They had all heard the whispers about the waitress at Bellucci's, the woman who could stop a killer with a word. They had just seen it come true. That half-second of collective, stunned hesitation was all Giuseppe and Lucio needed. They didn't pause. They moved. It was a brutal, swift, and precise disabling. 2 sharp cracks from Lucio's suppressed pistol, not aimed at chests, but at a knee and a shoulder. The men went down screaming. Giuseppe, despite his wounded arm, lunged at the kid holding Eli, disarming him with a sharp, precise strike to the wrist that sent the gun clattering across the concrete. In less than 3 seconds, the armed threat was neutralized. Only Marcel was left. The old man, his asset gone, turned and scrambled up a narrow iron staircase toward a high gantry crane that spanned the dark warehouse. He held up a small, black detonator. "No closer," he screamed, his voice cracking. "The whole bay is rigged with the original demolition charges." "I'll send us all to hell before I let you take me." Giuseppe stopped at the base of the stairs, breathing hard, his hand gripping his bleeding arm. "Marcel—" "Wait," Harper shouted, moving forward. She didn't appeal to his mercy. She appealed to his greed. "You do that, and you're just a dead man who made a mess. But you're alive right now, and you still have value. You know where the offshore accounts are. You know who else in the family wanted this. That's your leverage. Don't throw it away." She was stalling, using the cold logic of their world against him. It worked. He paused on the gantry, his thumb hovering over the button, his desperate mind processing the sudden, viable alternative. That pause was his undoing. Giuseppe was already moving, taking the stairs on the far side, ascending into the shadows. Marcel heard him too late. He turned, and Giuseppe lunged, not at him, but at the hand holding the detonator. It was not a graceful fight. It was a clumsy, desperate grapple between 2 men in expensive suits, one of them bleeding. On a narrow, rusty walkway, Marcel shoved. Giuseppe blocked. Marcel swung the detonator wildly. His foot slipped on the slick metal, and he lost his balance. His scream was short, cut off by the final, sickening impact as he hit the concrete floor 30 feet below. Giuseppe stood on the gantry, breathing hard, the black detonator now clenched in his good hand. He hadn't shot him. He hadn't pushed him. Marcel had fallen to his own panic. As if summoned by the silence, the main bay doors roared open, flooding the warehouse with blinding white light. ASAB tactical teams swarmed in, their weapons raised. Leora Sykes was at their center, her face a mask of cold fury. She surveyed the scene, Marcel dead, the Rook Street gunman wounded and in cuffs, Eli Tran shaking, and Giuseppe bleeding, walking slowly down the stairs with Harper at his side. "Where are they?" Leora demanded, her voice tight. "Where are the rest of your men?" The transport crew's Giuseppe just looked at her, then at Harper. Harper's original deal, the one Leora had ignored to set this trap, had been honored by Giuseppe, while ASAB was setting its perimeter. Tarallo's main logistics network, his trucks, his men, his real assets, had been quietly evacuated under the cover of the festival. Leora had her trader and a few street soldiers, but the D'Aquila organization, the real prize, had vanished from her grasp. It was a half-victory, and as she looked at Harper, she knew exactly who had outmaneuvered her. The Viridian Harbor newspaper called the incident at the old terminal a violent clash between rival gangs. The official story was brief, full of speculation, and conspicuously absent of key names. Giuseppe Tarallo was not mentioned. Harper Ward was not mentioned. Leora Sykes and ASAB had ensured the witness list was buried deep. Harper, they decided, was too valuable an asset to be burned in a public report. She was a potential witness, a future contact, a hook they might one day need inside the Tarallo organization. They met one last time, in the same cold, anonymous coffee shop as before. Leora Sykes looked exhausted, her professional anger from the terminal having settled into a grudging respect. "We recovered 3 high-level members of the Rook Street Union, and we have Marcel Leon's body," she said, stirring a plastic stick in her coffee. "It was a partial win, but you're compromised. Ward." She slid a thick, plain envelope across the table. "This is the offer. Full federal protection. You and your brother. New names, new city, new life. We can have you on a train to Chicago in 12 hours. You'd be free of him." Harper looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "And the other option," Leora sighed, "the other option is you stay. You stay in Viridian, in a city we both know he controls. You stay under the protection of a man my agency considers temporarily useful. You'd be on your own, no wire, no safety line." Harper thought of Noah. She pictured him in the soundproofed room at the Aria vault, his fingers flying over the guitar strings, his face lit with a pure, unadulterated joy she hadn't seen in years. The Harbor Light Arts Collective was real. The scholarship was real. If she ran, if she took this envelope, she would be ripping him away from the one chance he had truly earned, dragging him back into her world of fear and instability. Starting over wasn't freedom, it was just a different kind of prison. She pushed the envelope back across the table. "I'm not running." Leora nodded slowly, as if she'd expected it. "I guess you're not. Good luck. Miss Ward, you're going to need it." Her old apartment was quiet. The landlord, paid handsomely by a D'Aquila renovation fund, had replaced the entire living room window. It was just a room again. She had sent Noah to his first orientation at the new school, wanting to be alone when she made this next decision. She heard the quiet, polite knock. It wasn't Lucio. She opened the door. Giuseppe stood there. He was alone. No guards, no visible weapons. He was wearing a simple black sweater, his left arm in a high-tech sling, the bandage stark white against the dark wool. He looked tired, vulnerable, and completely out of place in her hallway. "The window looks good," he said, his voice quiet. She stepped aside to let him in. They stood awkwardly in the small living room, the space that had seen everything from her terror to his ambition. "You saw Sykes," he said. It wasn't a question. "She offered me a new life." Harper replied. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the new, clean glass. "If you choose to leave, if you take your brother and go, I will clear the way. I will make sure no one from my world, or hers, ever looks for you again." He finally met her eyes, the vulnerability deepening. "But I will hate it, for a very long time." This was it, the final move. She felt the weight of her choice, the gray, compromised world she was about to step into. "If I leave," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you'll just go back to being the man who gives orders. You'll forget what it's like to listen. You'll build your walls higher. You'll replace me in a week." She took a step closer, forcing him to see her. Not the asset, not the lover, but the woman. "But if I stay, Giuseppe, you have to remember who I am. I'm the woman who stopped a killer in his tracks. I'm the one who faced down Marcel. I am not your property. I am not a pawn, and I will not be owned." The silence stretched, thick and heavy. A flicker of pain, or perhaps just exhaustion, crossed his face, and then a slow, tired, genuine smile touched his mouth. It was the first real one she had ever seen. "That," he said, his voice rough, "is precisely why I want you to stay." He led her not to a car, but up the stairs, to the flat, tarred roof of her own building. The night was cold, the wind sharp, carrying the scent of the sea. Below them, the lights of Viridian Harbor glittered like a fallen constellation. It was not his world, or hers. It was just the city. She shivered, and he moved to stand beside her, blocking the worst of the wind with his own body. Harper leaned her head against his good shoulder, a simple gesture of exhaustion and trust. His uninjured arm came around her, his hand settling on her waist. The grip was firm, possessive, a silent claim, but it wasn't a vice. It wasn't the grip of an owner. It was the hold of a man who had learned, the hard way, to respect the thing he was holding. He turned his head, his face close to hers. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the desperate, hungry encounters they had shared before. It was slow. It was aching with emotion, 1,000 words of truce and surrender and shared loss. It was a kiss of equals. Their foreheads touched, their breath mingling in the cold air. "Stay with me," he whispered, his lips brushing hers. "Not because you owe me, not because of your brother. Stay because you want to see me do this right." She closed her eyes, breathing him in. This was the gray area. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't safe, but it was real, and for the first time, it was her choice. The next morning, an order went out from the penthouse office of the D'Aquila Council Hall. All standing contracts with auxiliary enforcement groups were to be terminated. A new community investment fund, the one Harper had demanded of Leora, was established with an initial deposit of $5 million, earmarked for harbor restoration and youth arts programs. And a new mandate was issued to all Turalo security teams. The new standard operating procedure, effective immediately, was incapacitation first, termination last. Harper's words had become his policy. The lights were warm at Bellucci's. It was a Tuesday night, and the kitchen was hot. Harper, back in her black apron, moved through the tables, her steps light. The restaurant was full. She walked to the VIP table by the bay window. Giuseppe Turalo was sitting there, his arm no longer in a sling, just a brace. He was eating his veal chop. He was not, however, alone. Harper set down a fresh glass of water. "Is everything to your liking, sir?" He looked up, and his eyes locked with hers. The crowded restaurant, the noise. The entire city of Viridian Harbor faded away. In his gaze, she saw the promise from the rooftop. In her gaze, she saw the woman who had agreed to stay and watch him keep it. They had chosen their gray world. Together. It had all started the night she said stop. And a killer, impossibly, had listened. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.